Hi, and welcome to this week's video blog on Some Assembly Required. Today I want to talk about how we as women, as moms, can recapture our self-identity. All too often when we have a baby, whether it's through birth or adoption, we tend to focus solely on being a mom. And that's natural because when a baby is little, they need a lot of our attention. But sometimes we forget to make that transition back to being who we were before we had kids. And I don't mean that literally. You don't have to go back to work. You don't have to be the same kind of person. But we subjugate ourselves into being a mom and a mom only, when that's only a part of who we are. Dads don't seem to have this problem or concern. They seem to be able to separate their dadness from their manness, from their husbandness. But we women, maybe because we're mostly primary caregivers, especially if we've given birth, even especially if we're nursing a baby, we tend to kind of fall into this mom thing with our whole being, and that continues beyond a baby's first couple of years. So first, let me explain a little bit about the seasons of parenting, and then I'm going to give some concrete ways that we can, as moms, recapture our self-identity. And it's important to recapture our self-identity because that makes us better moms. When we feel satisfied and secure and confident in who we are as a woman, being a mom is just an extension of that. So let's talk first about the seasons of parenting. There are 3 seasons of parenting. Season 1 is a season of service. This lasts from birth to age 2. This is when the child is the center of our universe. And why? Because the child can't do anything by his or herself, right? Baby needs to be fed, baby cries, they can't tell us what's wrong, we have to do everything. Between the ages of 2 and 3, we have lost, as a collective whole society, we have lost the transition to moving the child from the center of the family, the baby, the toddler, from the center of the family to the peripheral. That doesn't mean that we ignore our kids. No, this means that the center of the family should be the husband and the wife, and the children should be around that. This is a very natural thing for the child. This is good for the child because it shows that the child is a part of something and not the center of something. So we need to move the child to the peripheral, to circling around us instead of being at the center. And we do this by not doing as much for the child, by helping the child learn to do things on his or her own, and things like that. And then during season 2, which is the season of leadership and authority, or some have called it the decade of discipline. And by discipline, I don't mean delivering consequences or punishment, although that's a part of it. It means more like creating disciples of our children. This is from ages 3 to 12, and this is where we instill our family values. This is where we help our children learn right from wrong. This is where we really try to start, or continue, I should say, that journey of helping our kids become boys and girls of character, of discovering who they are in our family, and really kind of working with them to create a family unit. Season 3 is a season of mentoring. This is age 13 to emancipation, which should be around college age. And this is where we move from telling our kids how to do things to listening, to being there to offer advice, but letting them make decisions. Here's one example from my life in that, because so many times as when our kids hit the teen years, we're like, oh my goodness, we forgot to do all this stuff, and we start micromanaging. So here's a real quick example of how that could look like. My daughters are, I have 2 daughters, and one of them is in high school, freshman this year, and the other one's in 8th grade and going to high school next year. We gave them pretty much autonomy on picking their classes. And this means making decisions about honors classes versus regular classes versus, AP classes eventually in their future. Why did we do that? Because it's their classes. did and we had confidence that their teachers would guide them into those right slots. So my 9th grader took general biology. She didn't want to do the science fair, and she took honors in other classes, but she took general biology. And it's been a real eye-opener for her in a lot of ways, because her teacher can see that her and a friend who took general biology probably should have taken the honors class. And so he's encouraging them. So next year she is going to take a science honors class because her teacher was encouraging her, and she spent this year with other kids who aren't motivated. And it's kind of been kind of almost a separate education for her. But she would never have learned that had we just said, no, you have to take honors. Because you are capable, you have to do it. That's one way where our mentoring is different from our elementary school kids, where we're like, yeah, you need to take this, because they don't have the ability to make it. So those are the 3 seasons. You know, depending on where you are in those seasons, depends on how much of an outside life you can have. So let's talk just briefly about why a mom should have outside interest. Because we should be the center of our child's life and not them. And we should be giving our kids a glimpse of this mysterious thing called adulthood. I'm convinced, I have no scientific backing on this, but I'm convinced that one of the reasons young adults are having trouble being emancipated is that we have not made adulthood a worthy goal. Being an adult doesn't seem to have any more privileges, or there seem to be no reason to be an adult. I've given my kids lots of reasons to be an adult. There are things that I say, well, when you're an adult, you can do that. When you're an adult, you can make those kind of decisions. When you're an adult, that's often in our household. I want them to know that there are privileges that come with being responsibilities, of course, with being an adult. And one of the reasons I show them that is how I use my own adulthood. I am not always doing things for my kids. I love my children dearly, and they know that, and I show that love for them, but they also know I have a lot of outside interests. I'm involved in writing groups. I'm involved in some volunteer work. I have other things that occupy my time, and they know that, and I think that's good for them to see, especially when they were little, that mom is going to her writer's meeting tonight. Mom is working on her book. Mom is doing these things. Because mom has a life outside of being a mom, and that's important. So how to recapture your self-identity? Reevaluate for your priorities. Where you spend your time is where your heart is, and it's perfectly fine for you to make some things that you enjoy a priority. Reevaluate your time. Keep a time journal. See where you're wasting time. See where you could add time. Reevaluate your schedule. Think about how you spend your time. What do you do during the week? What do you do during the day? How is your schedule made? Reevaluate your home. Are we trying to do too much? Are we trying to be the perfect Martha Stewart? Are we trying to have something that doesn't bring us joy, but we do it because we feel it's expected? Are we doing too much around our home? Our kids should be doing a lot of chores. They are perfectly capable of doing a lot of chores. I was just talking to my my dentist this week. Some of my kids had dental appointments, and she was just saying how stressed she was about making lunches for her kids. And her kids are, I think, almost 7 and almost 9. And she asked me, because she knows I have 4 kids, and she said, what do you do about lunches? I said, well, I don't make them. The kids make them. And they've been doing it for many years. And there's this pause. She goes, really? I was like, yeah, they can make their own lunches. Not saying you cannot make your kids' lunches if that brings you joy, but it doesn't bring me joy, and it didn't bring this other mom joy. So I'm like, stop doing it. Your kids are capable. That's what I mean. You need to have your kids do the things around the house and not be consumers, and be contributors. Reevaluate your relationship with your husband. He should not be an afterthought. He should not be, oh yeah, I have to talk to you after talking all day and running around all day. If you are always super stressed at the end of the day because you've been taking the kids to all these appointments or activities or something, you may need to cut back on that. so you can spend some time with this man you married. I do not want to get to my last child graduating from high school or graduating from college and look at my husband and think, who is this man? What do we have in common? No, I want to look at him and say, okay, are we going to go rent an RV and travel around the country? Or, we're going to have to celebrate because I love this man and I want to be with him. And I need to make time to be with him during raising our kids. Reevaluate yourself. How have you neglected yourself? As moms, we often put ourselves and our needs last. We need to change that and put our needs first. This doesn't mean that we ignore our kids, but if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not getting the sleep that we need, if we're not feeding ourselves right, if we're not finding time with friends, spending time with God, spending time at home in the ways that we enjoy, we don't have a lot to give to someone else. And here's one example I mean by that. I love this quote from a French woman in the book, Bringing Up Baby. Pamela Druckelman, I believe, wrote it several years ago. This French woman, Pamela says to Pamela's an American living in Paris, and she says to this French woman, how come your kids aren't taking tennis lessons anymore? And the mom says, they enjoyed it, but it wasn't working out for me. And I love that because this is a woman who was like, yeah, this is something my kids could do, but they're not anymore because it wasn't good for me as their mom, as a woman. And I think the more that we can say that, the more that we can say, that activity is not going to work for me. It's not going to work for our family as a whole. Too often we look at one kid and we think, oh, well, this kid has expressed an interest in soccer. And maybe they're good at soccer. But maybe those games and those practices are really infringing on our time as a family and are really adding a layer of stress to your life that shouldn't be there. So I just want to wrap up this week's video blog by saying, let's think about who we are and who we want to be as women, as wives, as mothers. And let's make sure that we spend the time and the effort and make sure that we say no to things that are going to infringe on us being that woman that God has called us to be, as well as being that mom. And to remember that we are more than moms. We are women of God. I hope you join me next week for another video blog on Some Assembly Required.